Hi, everyone. Welcome to the virtual breakout session of Z3 2021 Futures Workshop. I am Deborah Fishman. I'll be your moderator today. I work professionally for Hakel, the Jewish Intentional Communities Incubator, and I also run a community that's part of the network that's called FED. For those of you who are attending Z3 since the morning, thank you for joining the Tribes, Jewish Wherever You Are, World Jewry team. If this is your first session of the day, I'd like to take a moment to orient you a bit. This is the 7th year of the Z3 conference, and in this hybrid event, the goal is to focus on one future scenario which will influence the relationship between diaspora, Jewry, and Israel. The utility of this exercise is that it allows us to experiment with potential solutions for possible scenarios. Moreover, it lets us try out different approaches in a controlled and safe environment. Earlier in the day, at the main plenary of the conference, we discussed a hypothetical scenario. We placed it in 2025 and are now discussing a specific development in the said potential future. This session will be broken up into 2 sections. In the first section, we will hear from our panelists, experts deeply involved in the peoplehood education in Israel and the US. Then in the second part, we will dive into specific scenarios and hear their proposed course of action from the panelists. Finally, we will ask you to share with us via chat and poll what you think. Now, without further delay, I would like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Gabe Axler. I'm originally from Chicago, moved to Beersheba 11 years ago. I currently work for a nonprofit organization called Eretz Ir. I'm the director of social tourism, exposing tourists and Israelis to social activism and social entrepreneurship across the country, as well as a Hakel consultant for communities around the world.
Hi, my name is Ravit Greenberg. I am currently based in Beersheba. I'm originally from upstate New York. I've been working in Bedouin society in the Negev for the last 6 years, and I'm currently going out on my own to start a content writing business in environmental sustainability.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I made Aliyah about 4 years ago, initially to Haifa. I also now live in Beersheba. I grew up in Melbourne, Australian Jewish community. And currently I work as a program director in Hechelot, an organization, NGO that works with diaspora youth. So we run programs in Israel and in the diaspora. And in addition to that, I am also a Hakel community advisor and a translator for Davar, the workers' newspaper for the Histadrut.
Great, thank you for introducing yourselves. The first question for you all is, please share with us a little bit about your work. So Gabe and Ravit, you want to kick us off?
Okay. I've worked for the last 12 years in what you would call Negev development work, really looking at this periphery of the country and seeing how it can be developed so that the quality of life improves for its residents. I started by working at Ben Gurion University. I then worked for Nefesh B'Nefesh, opening up a southern office. And at the same time, while in Mandel, I understood that I really wanted to be working in Bedouin society. I just felt scared to do it as a Jewish American woman out of fear of paternalism. But then I did that. And I've been working in STEM education in Bedouin society for the last 6 years. I'll say that we also together started a community in Beersheba called Beirut, which is a partnership minion.
Thank you.
And I currently work, as I said, for Eretz Ir, directing a program focused on social tourism, community-based tourism. The idea really being showcasing the work that communities are doing in Israel through resilience and focusing on activism, so that when tour groups are coming to visit Israel, they have the opportunity to really kind of deep dive into issues facing Israelis, not focused on the bigger conflict, Israeli-Palestinian, but more focused on the internal struggles in Israel, while also having the opportunity to see some of the amazing work being done to meet those issues and challenges.
Great.
So I work with Hechalutz, as I said, an NGO that works with diaspora youth across the world from various Jewish communities. The main communities I work with is the department that deals with primarily Australia and New Zealand, but I also work with youth from North America and from South Africa. And primarily what we do is, whether it's trips to the various countries in order to run seminars in the countries, or leadership training. So we have a 3-month program where we take youth to kibbutz Ravit in the north, and we have them have the kibbutz experience of doing agriculture while also touring around the country. And the main aims of the program are both build political and Jewish literacy, teach Hebrew, educate about why learning Hebrew at all is like a meaningful experience and a meaningful skill to have, and general leadership training. So the classic image you have of Machon, the Institute of Leadership, of coming to Israel, building your leadership skills, and then going back into the diaspora and learning how to be a meaningful leader in your community, how to run community centers, youth houses, put on camps, take kids on hikes, all the kind of classic Zionist things that I imagine many of us did as children. So we kind of work to educate on that. In addition to that, I work with Davar, where there's really this question of how do you take the dilemmas of Israeli society and bring those dilemmas in a understandable, conceivable way, with a spin that you wouldn't normally expect from most major newspapers. How do you take those dilemmas and then bring them as stories so that diaspora Jewish communities can understand them, relate to them, think they're important, and not just what's happening with the conflict and not what's happening in the parliament, but also Israeli workers and their rights and cultural events that are going on and all the kinds of things that Israelis actually talk and care about on a day-to-day basis that doesn't usually make its way to the diaspora.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So most of the Z3 participants are either Israeli or North American. What do they need to know about other centers of world Jewry?
I guess I can start with that one. I think from what I've seen running programs here, and also somebody that comes from Australia, I think the community really deeply shapes the relationship that people have to Israel and the way that they process stories that they hear from Israel. They understand their own Jewish identity. Working with diaspora youth, we often have discussions around your relationship with Hebrew or assimilation, whether you understand yourself as a minority in the diaspora. And I think I've really seen that it's deeply defined by the community's capacity to send messaging, to send education, to bring their youth to Israel. The Australian Jewish community in particular is incredibly tight-knit. It's a community that identifies itself as incredibly Zionist. Something like 92% of all Jews in Australia at some point have been in Israel. More than 50% of them within the last 3 years, many of them for more than 2-3 months. And to the point where the question of whether you're a Zionist, it's incredibly on the periphery to self-describe as not a Zionist or as anti-Zionist. It's not necessarily the case in a community like South Africa, which I think is a lot more polarized, where you have the normative community that's incredibly Zionist, and then a growing youth body that understands themselves as explicitly not Zionist.
Thank you.
I think from the work that I've done with the Hakel kind of global network of communities, part of the experience of being a Hakel community is that there's an Israel trip to learn from and learn with communities, intentional communities in Israel. And I find the work with the communities from different areas of the world to be like fascinating and so different from working with North American or specifically American Jewry, and that their issues connection to Israel comes seemingly much less with like the baggage of am I Zionist, am I not Zionist, what's happening on college campuses, etc. I had the opportunity to speak with a colleague who works with communities in the former Soviet Union, and his take was very interesting, and that there, because Judaism is just like recently being discovered for a lot of the younger people, so within the last 20 or 30 years, just discovering your Jewish identity, discovering traditions, that Israel is this like amazing space, idealized, a place where Jews are safe and proud, place of innovation, source of power. So kind of a different, little bit of a different take than maybe young Jewish adults from the US for sure. So that was kind of an interesting take from a colleague.
Thank you. And then what are some of the trends and relations with young Jews and Israel in your part of the world? And how would you see them projecting forward if you imagine towards the future?
Sorry, repeat that question once more. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. What are the trends and relations with young adults in Israel in your part of the world? And how do you see them projecting forward if you want to imagine towards the future? Where do you, what you just described and everything, the connection to Israel, how do you see that evolving?
I think that one thing that I'm starting to see among young Jews in Israel, as it relates to young Jews from around the world, is that they're more open to learning from young Jews around the world and are more open to being taught. So whereas shlichut might have once been going abroad in order to bring your, authentic Jewish Israeli self, they now understand there's an authentic Jewish self sitting across from them in whatever room they're in, wherever they are. I also think on the spiritual front that younger Jewish Israelis who might not identify as Orthodox or conservative or part of any mainstream of Judaism do see a lot of the more fringe spiritual work happening in the States as a source of inspiration to congregate religiously, spiritually, without necessarily being part of any formal movement. So that's something I see.
Great.
I'll just add that I think America's actually, for better or worse, a good indication of, I think, at least where other English-speaking countries are heading. I have this kind of theory of whatever you see in America, you'll see in Australia 5 years later. And it really is clear, both in terms of my cohort or kids I see, their capacity to deal with Israel or justify the existence of Israel or defend Israel's actions or even be able to answer themselves why, in kind of this unquestioning way, why Israel is important in their lives is something that's being challenged and decreasing. And it's partly as a result of university campuses. It's partly a result of, I think, things like Instagram and TikTok, which are actually far more exposing youth to lots of different images and lots of different dilemmas and lots of different questions. And it also is paired in with the notion that you need to belong to camps and adopt the entire ideology of a camp. And I think what I'm seeing is a real inability for youth to be able to answer questions around Israel than they could have 5-10 years ago with the same tools that they received. I mean, when I was growing up, the narrative that I received was Israel exists because of the Holocaust, or there's no partners for peace, and all the kinds of classic things I think most of us know, which I think are really important elements to one's Zionist identity. But I think younger generations are finding it less easy to relate to, whether it's because they can't remember wars, or they take the messaging as less satisfactory, or it just speaks their language less. And there's a real need for a redevelopment in what is the language that we actually communicate to youth. What is the messaging? What are the ideas we bring? What are the dilemmas that they're experiencing, they're thinking about, and they're feeling? And how do we package it in a way that they can relate to and engage with? Because otherwise they're simply becoming less disinterested with the whole thing. That even the concept of a national identity is being put into question when people are more interested in getting in touch with their identity through how do they shape their Instagram posts.
I'm seeing more of a focus on just social entrepreneurship. So if we think of Israel as like startup nation and high tech and apps, et cetera, the young people both, I mean, in the US and also in Israel, kind of taking it into their own hands to address more local issues. So be it, I don't know, really kind of basic, simple aspects to their life. So more parks, more green space, more kind of activism vis-a-vis local municipalities coming together to work on issues that are dear to their heart that might not be, large national issues, but are like, we'd love to have yoga in the park, and that's not something that we have. And so we're going to kind of congregate and come together and make something happen. And it can also kind of look in, I don't know, kind of have a more business side of it. So kind of how to take ideas of social entrepreneurship, but weaving in elements that are also benefiting the local community. So I see that as kind of a trend, both in definitely in the US and also in Israel.
Great, thank you. So speaking of opportunities for young Jews to come together, how do intentional Jewish communities help address some of the challenges you see amongst young Jews in their relationship to Israel and other components of Jewish identity? And how will growing this movement move the dial in the future?
Repeat the question.
There's just a little lag, so it's hard to hear the question.
Oh, I can repeat it. How do intentional Jewish communities help address some of the challenges that you see amongst young Jews in their relationship to Israel and other components of Jewish identity? And how will growing this movement move the dial looking towards the future?
I think we sometimes severely underestimate the impact that community has. Like this whole element of like us understanding ourselves as individuals that are unaffected and shape our opinions on our own. I think our like Jews exist in a community, and it's either their local physical community of like the shul they go to, or the school they went to, or the youth group they're in, or the football club they're a part of. And I think youth growing up in the diaspora are a part of communities. It's just those communities might only exist on their phone, for example. And those communities are the things that are going to shape, and more than any convincing news article that they read, more than any convincing university class they go to, more than really any other thing, the thing I think that's defining their relationship with Israel, their relationship with their Jewish identity, how they understand themselves and their place in the world, is their community. And I think intentional communities are both a thing that's more in vogue today. It's a thing that people are actually authentically interested in again. And it's a thing that I think when a community can come together and choose to say that what we're going to do is invest in our Jewish identity and value nationalism and put tradition at the center and create something that could be progressive but also connected to our roots and all these different kinds of things, it's this kind of space that creates something that people want to relate to and define themselves according to and say I belong to, and I shape my opinions and ideas according to that thing that I've created with other people. Because in my opinion, everyone is going to belong to a community, except for isolated few that are really disconnected. The vast majority of people belong to a community, and I think intentional communities are something that really offers that in a meaningful way that isn't just online.
So something I would like to add in terms of online and in-person intentional communities, is something that I think we've experienced in our community in Beersheba, which is an ingathering of young Jews from many places in the world, is that it's not an echo chamber, and that there is a wide range of political opinions, feelings around Zionism, feelings around Israeli identity or diaspora identity. And the thing is when you're not in an echo chamber and also you're in a Shomer Shabbat community, your opinions aren't being published on social media. And perhaps that also allows for people to be more free with what they're saying and be willing to take part in conversation that is perhaps more challenging. But if was recorded online, they would feel more embarrassed by. And so I feel concerned for those people who feel more comfortable in online communities, that they might feel less room for experimentation in their viewpoints, and yes, less willingness to engage in debate because of the digital paper trail they're leaving behind. So I feel that intentional community building in person with an aspect that's not online and where people aren't outed online is a really important way to foster communication, especially if it's a place in which people differ in opinion.
And I would add, I think that intentional communities might be able to solve a little bit of an issue surrounding Israel as a topic of conversation. I think it often is divisive. People don't, know how other people in their community are going to feel, and so it might be best to avoid, a divisive subject. And I think intentional communities are generally smaller, generally more intimate, and so if you have a deeper relationship with the people you're in community with, that also gives you a sense of, I think, ability to express an opinion that might not be liked or approved, but that I feel comfortable because these people are my friends on multiple levels, or we're in a partnership. We have a shared agenda, we have a shared vision, and we're moving that forward. And it's not based on the rabbi or the community organizer, et cetera. It's much smaller, much more, in someone's living room. And I think those kind of conversations can be much more fruitful and helpful as far as discussing some of the issues or challenges facing, 21st century Zionism, especially for young adults.
I'd like to add one more thing to that, because I think it's an important point, is also that when you have the trusting relationships and you don't have institutional backing, so there's no financial backing, which is stopping you from having any conversations, I think it allows for a larger range of opinions, political opinions, religious opinions, to be within the span of community, and people don't necessarily need to feel on the outside. And also when it's intentional community that's been built from the ground up, there is a real requirement there's begging for empathetic listening. And when people have to empathetically, or are asked to empathetically listen to each other and hear a range of opinions, oftentimes, again, that creates space that fosters people being able to differ and still have conversation, which is, I think, what many of us perhaps in our 30s, in our later 30s are feeling concerned about. We're this in-between generation that I think sees some problematic factors in how conversations are taking place today.
Great. Very interesting. How do you understand the difference between the relationship between North American Jewry and Israel and that of communities in other places? And where do you think that difference comes from, the difference between different countries' relationship with Israel?
I'll relate an anecdote. We have a very close friend who's been working for the last few years in different smaller European Jewish communities, 5,000, 10,000 person communities. And she was relaying that she met with one of the rabbis of the community, and he had an escorted bodyguard, maybe one or two bodyguards, and they went into the restaurant, and the bodyguards are hanging outside. And she asked him, like, why do you feel the need to have a bodyguard? And he said, well, 15 years ago, there was an attack. And since then, the government placed bodyguards with me, and that's kind of been the case ever since. I think that American Jewry, North American Jewry is so kind of big, it's well entrenched, it's well represented in culture and politics and a lot of different spaces, like people wearing the crazy, Hanukkah, Christmassy sweaters all over, Twitter, Instagram. I don't think you have that as much in Copenhagen or in Milan or in, I don't know, other smaller spaces. And I think there's, I don't know, that kind of smallness or the feeling of kind of being more isolated affects your relationship to Israel, to your Jewish identity, and the feeling that you can, feel comfortable coming out and saying, I don't know, BDS or coming out against Israel. I think you don't have the luxury maybe in smaller communities to be voicing that opinion, because you're just trying to maintain something that's smaller and maybe in another generation might not be there. And so that is, I think, constantly playing in the minds of Jews in smaller communities, whereas bigger cities in North America, I think it's a very different experience.
Thank you.
I mean, I'll say for the Australian Jewish community, it's really at the center of the community itself. I think it's very hard to remove Israel as a concept from the Australian Jewish community, because it's very much central. You kind of have these elements of like relationship with my shul, incredibly large descendants of Holocaust survivors, relationship with Israel, and these kinds of three things have this big interplay that defines the identity of the community, and as well as the vast majority of Australian Jews live in Jewish communities. And I think that in itself means that if you define your identity by a community and your community is defined by your relationship with Israel, then you have to also define yourself in relation to Israel and have to have things to say about it. You also have more spaces where you don't necessarily have to justify the existence of the state of Israel, and instead you are concerned about the survival of the state of Israel, because it, again, defines, like, I think if Israel disappeared tomorrow, the Australian Jewish community would be in a panic, not just because of the obvious reasons of a bunch of people disappearing, but also because it wouldn't know how to explain what it is anymore. And I think that has an incredibly strong force on the Australian Jewish community. That the schools are considered Zionist, the kids learn Hebrew, and I have this funny anecdote that the first time I really met people that weren't Jewish was coming to Israel, because I kind of went through my entire life of like going to a Jewish day school, going to a youth group. All my friends and family friends were Jewish. The guy that owned the cafe that I like going to was Jewish. And in university, because I had a large enough cohort of friends that I went to school with or I was in youth with, so everyone was Jewish. And coming to Israel, I meet a lot of people that aren't Jewish, and suddenly it's really different. And I think that concept is incredibly foreign for the Australian Jewish community, but it's shifting towards the way that America looks like today.
Thank you. Great. So the final question is, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities that your constituents face these days? I'll just repeat it. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities that your constituents face these days?
I think that, I mean, this is cliche to say, but I think that with the restrictions on travel, people are going to need to look more locally to find some of their inspiration and excitement and engagement. And perhaps that will allow people to connect in more intimate ways with their immediate surroundings, the people surrounding them, and that they can find new beauty in those spaces. Or escape and go somewhere.
I think the challenge is to find meaning in your Judaism, meaning in your experience, and this is age old, right? So meaning in your experience, and the opportunity is, how do you create that? We're blessed that we have so much information online, so many opportunities, so many resources. The question is how to harness those and bring them into your life and into your community and enrich it and make it your own, and not just feel okay, I'm check mark, I'm part of this sub-community, I'm part of this community, I'm with this group of friends, but how am I infusing that with meaning? We see Corona, people in their homes, people kind of thirsting for something more, and people looking for new and meaningful ways to engage. The question is, how do you not just wait for somebody else to do that, but how do you have a role in creating that?
Thank you.
I would say that the challenges that my communities face are a big one is this: the strength of a lot of the communities that I work with for a really long time has been intense centralization, which I think is sometimes a dirty word these days, but the community holds together. People go to the shul and they don't question why they go to the shul. People send their kids to youth movements, they don't question why, and they go to the classic Jewish day schools. Now, we're seeing a serious decrease in that. If you look at the numbers of kids that attend youth groups, it's a fraction of what it used to be, which at least for the Australian, the New Zealand Jewish communities, and I would say South Africa as well, a lot of people defined their identity, particularly if they didn't go to a shul or didn't go to a Jewish day school, they defined their identity by the youth group that they went to. And it was the thing that strengthened their connection to Israel. And in general, youth are disinterested in it. They're not going in the same numbers that they used to, which also means they're going less to gap year programs. And if they are going to gap year programs, it's less built on some kind of deep relationship to Israel and more a brief pit stop in Israel where they get to scuba dive in Eilat before they go climb mountains in Nepal. And so I think one of the main challenges is this decrease in that. The Jewish day schools are incredibly unaffordable these days, and it really means that a lot of parents are hesitant to send their children to those schools and looking for other options. And there's a general disinterest in doing things like learning Hebrew and learning Jewish tradition. Now, on one hand, I think those things are a really significant challenge for the capacity for Jewish communities to stick together, as well as have a relationship with Jewish identity and with Israel. And on the other hand, I think it creates a vacuum for opportunity. I think in itself is the opportunity. And I think there's a lot of really interesting experimental things that are going on, whether it's people creating new Kabbalat Shabbat services and Jewish tradition in small micro communities, or the desire for youth groups to reinvent themselves and redefine what they are, particularly with this kind of move away from Aliyah as this ultimate goal that we want all our youth to, move to Israel one day and settle and establish new communities and new kibbutzim there. I think it gives a lot of space for radical creation, but I think it actually really demands for those communities to not just work with the old models, but have to say serious things about what models they want to create that are also not just appealing for donors for the next year, 2 years, but are something that people want to invest in the long term for the next few decades.
Very interesting. Thank you.
I'd just like to feed off of that. I really agree with everything you just said. From what I see, and just a couple other places for challenges and opportunities, I would say one is, yes, in terms of the unaffordability of mainstream Jewish society in the United States, perhaps also in Australia, and I'm sure in other places, that those streams of Jewish society are losing out on a lot of the young activists who aren't interested in trying to make a couple $100,000 a year. And that's a sad thing, because those activists and intentional community builders bring with them a lot of drive and motivation and interest and other forms of power that don't come in the form of money. And so I think that's going to be a challenge for the Jewish community, a real challenge moving forward, is that a lot of interesting things are going to happen on the sidelines just because those are people who are intentionally choosing not to commit to a lifestyle that will afford them to be part of mainstream Jewish community. So that's one thing I would say. Another thing I just wanted to say about Aliyah, which I guess I'm just going to throw in there because why not, is like, what are we going to start to tell kids about the population growth problem in Israel? Because like, it's really a problem. And youth are going to know about it more and more, and the fact that there's a real fear of overpopulation here. And I don't know, I just think about it a lot with Aliyah, whereas it's something I never thought about in my teens or 20s. Now I'm just like, wait, can people promote Aliyah in the same way while talking about overpopulation in Israel? So that's another question I would just bring up.
That's a really good question. Speaking of questions, I think at this point we're going to turn to see if there are any questions from the viewers out there. Please, if you haven't already, you can post them in your chat and we will address them. Thank you. Just wait one more minute. If you have a question, just post it in the chat and we will address them. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions at this point, so perhaps we will continue. And if you have questions, you can continue posting them, and they will be collected and addressed at a future point. We're going to read the scenario now that we are going to speak to more specifically. So I'm going to post it in the chat and also read it out loud. 1 second. So it is the eve of Pesach 2025, days after the conclusion of Operation Shushan, a military offense starting on Purim, in which Israel quashed a coordinated attack on several fronts. While the casualties on the Israeli side were limited, the Palestinians suffered substantial casualties. Thousands are displaced. As part of the growing distancing from Israel, Goshen, a Jewish collective, publishes an insert to the Haggadah in which they compare Israel to the Egyptian oppressive slave masters and Zionism to the golden calf of our time. Across platforms and organizations, many endorse and adopt the insert. An online campaign catapults this initiative and begins trending with hashtags such as hashtag even the Jews know and hashtag let my people go, appearing across platforms. Demonstrations across the country ensued. And then this is the one that we're looking at for our room in particular. I'm going to again just post it in the chat. Your sizable network includes members from across the Jewish world, spanning from Latin America to Australia. You are in contact with a very diverse membership. Due to your membership's solid online literacy, the news of Goshen's insert spreads like wildfire. Despite having a significant North American presence, your network primarily serves communities from across the globe. And while the tension created due to Goshen's actions looms large on the American-Israeli scene, you notice a different trend bubbling amongst your ranks. Vocal communities from other communities, such as Australia and Latin America, are discontent with the Israel-US-centric discourse. Furthermore, they are fed up with how a small minority of North American voices dominate the Jewish public discourse, skewing and misrepresenting what they view to be the vast majority of Jews. They decide to act. They organize a petition calling for the removal from the network's communities who adopt Goshen's insert. So that is what we're speaking about now. We're in the future, and I'm going to ask our panelists to address a few questions. First of all, how do you think about the concept of a community of communities, such as this community that's encompassing communities from Latin America and Australia, et cetera? So it's a community of communities. What are our communal boundaries?
Maybe I'll speak first. I don't work for Hakel here, or for Eretz Ear. I don't work for a network of communities, but what I would say is I think that networks of communities are really able to support communities' development, growth, foster their self-identification, and and just like enrich that system. I don't think that networks of communities should touch politics or try to dictate communal stances on anything. Because I think what makes them a network of communities is that they support a full range of opinions and what happens. And they believe that, what's beautiful about Hakel, or what's beautiful about Eretz Ear, is that there's such a wide range of communities involved. And I think that once you start getting, trying to dictate or trying to bring the discourse to this 1% of discourse that's most contentious, it's where you lose your audience.
Thank you.
I also think what differentiates it from like a movement, like the conservative movement, the Orthodox movement, and the board, it's not as top down, it's much more middle out. So it's talking, with the people on the ground, but then also kind of communicating to bigger federations or bigger ministries. And I think that's the beauty of it. And then it's not going to be dictating what should or shouldn't be done on individual communal levels. And I think it's about hopefully helping to foster a healthy conversation, maybe best practices, maybe working with different community mentors on how to facilitate a meaningful conversation about a really contentious issue. But by and large, the communities that are part of this, more global network, it's not Zionism as the key or just Israel. It's really about action in your community, about a mesima, about intentionality, about a purpose, ambition driven. And I think that's I think the focus and the beauty of this kind of community of communities, and hopefully not letting something like this scenario break that apart.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is about, what are your thoughts about the scenario that was presented and how your community or network of Jews in your part of the world would react or respond to what was presented?
So I think it's a really plausible scenario. I think it's basically describes what we can expect in 2025 across the board. And I think when talking about what we can expect from our communities, that it needs to be broken down into communities, plural, because what can I expect from the mainstream Australian Jewish community? Discussed at a project like that, specifically the Goshen insert, I imagine signing onto the petition, requesting their removal from the network, kind of an attitude of they're past the pale and they don't belong in the community. I think what's dangerous about that response is what can I expect from developing communities, particularly young developing communities, is a reaffirmation of their assumptions about their mainstream community. The sense of there's a blind support of Israel. There's no capacity for dialogue and discourse. This community is undemocratic, which I don't think is necessarily 100% accurate description of mainstream Australian Jewish community, but it's definitely the messaging that young Australian Jews are processing about a response like that. And I think on one hand, there's part of me that says any kind of losing ground to Goshen or organizations. Any giving legitimacy to it is losing ground in a debate around Israel, and it makes me hesitant. And on the other hand, I say you have to seriously address these accusations. You need to create discourse and education that gives people a space to talk about these dilemmas, because the image that people around the world see of Israel in 2021 is very different to the image that we had post 6-Day War. This kind of miracle survived the existential dilemma around will Israel survive, when Israel survive, what an incredible success we had. They're two radically different images, and I think the best thing that that diaspora Jewish communities can do is build new language around how do we describe Israel, both language that models things that youth already speak about. For example, discourse around decolonization is a very popular discussion with youth, and I think if we were to translate the ways that early Zionist thinkers talked around, Bill Katznelson, Rachel the poet, all those thinkers, if you were to take them to 2021, they would speak in the language of decolonization, these dilemmas, these same kind of concepts that haven't effectively been translated to modern day Jewish communities, to Israel. And I think I would respond to Goshen basically by saying, okay, what is the discourse that we actually need to have? What are the kinds of conversations we actually need to have in our Jewish communities and around Israel that speaks the language of Goshen and can effectively rebut it, and not just using Israel's a startup nation, Israel invented the cherry tomato and SMS, and Israel has a right to defend itself, because it's not language that people are interested in today, at least no one that actually wants to challenge Israel in any capacity.
I'll jump in here again. I again like what Jonathan has to say. I just want to add that I think it's not just about language, it's about listening. And I think in the older generation, or in the generation of established shows where a lot of this political conversation would take place, is at Kiddush, right? Like Shabbat meals or Kiddush. And that's not a space where like active listening is practiced or empathetic listening is practiced. And I think that practice around empathetic listening and active listening is really important for across generations. And perhaps if we could bring more of that into the Jewish communal space, we'd be doing a real service to help these conversations happen.
That's a great segue to the next question, which is, what would be your response as a communal leader? How could you implement some of what you're saying as a communal leader to affect this situation?
I would say that step one is build your own Haggadah insert. Like, I think the most important thing is that the community needs to not define itself by what it isn't, but by what it is. And if you're afraid of your community adopting a Haggadah insert, and you want to be very clear that that's not the message that you're sending, then build your own Haggadah insert. And those that want to use Goshen's Haggadah insert will use Goshen's Haggadah insert. And when people receive your Haggadah insert, they'll see that you have different messaging.
I love that idea. Thanks.
Yeah, I would also like to add, don't give in that knee-jerk reaction. Like when you were asking the previous question, I kind of felt like, at least in Israel, it's like a circle the wagons. They don't know what they're talking about. Just kind of would push people to be more in that protective mode about what's happening in Israel, because it's complicated here, and Jews abroad they don't get it. They don't live here. They don't understand the struggles. And I think that kind of working against that knee-jerk reaction and going back to what Ravit said, just trying to listen, trying to understand where's the pain coming from, why are they pushing this insert, and not necessarily saying why is it right or why isn't it right, but just giving space to maybe just better understand where the frustration is and what's happening, and at least try to open an avenue for understanding, and not validating, but just listening to another opinion. And the same would go, I think, for the flip side. So for communities, broader communities, specifically in America, younger communities that would be having a very difficult time with this Operation Shushan. Why are Israelis thinking how they think, feeling how they feel? Why are they not up in arms? Like, why is this insert not coming from Israel? Why is it coming from Goshen? And having that be a conversation that is maybe playing out in different communities in America or North America. I think that would be something I would try to encourage for community leaders to engage in.
So let's throw a twist in it, which is that not only is your community approached to sign the petition, but your Chavruta community in Chicago is also urging you to adopt the insert. So how do you respond to this pressure?
I think the fun part about being an intentional community is that you have a lot more legroom and like space to wiggle, right? And like even these partnerships are much more level, or like they don't feel like one community would dictate what another community would do, but rather there might be collaboration, conversation around how to deal with it. And so I think that's one of the beauties of intentional community building and these networks, is that there's not a real hierarchy.
I think I would do what I said before. I think one, I would build, invite community members to a discussion led by, take maybe a few key leadership of the community, have our first initial rapid educational process, and then build some kind of encounter meeting where we invite the wider community to come and sit and discuss what's going on in Israel and read texts and express how we're feeling and relate to our own lives. Maybe say, I don't know, get in contact with people living in Israel going through the operation and ask them to record their experiences and what they're thinking and feeling, and have some kind of discussion around that. And when faced with a dilemma around this insert, I think I would invite people to sit together after the educational process and say, okay, we've gone through this, 2-hour intensive in which we sat, we read, we listened, we learned. And now we'll have some homework. We want to spend the next week building our own insert that reflects our community and that says how we feel. I mean, the beauty of Haggadot is they're really something that is just made over and over again. They're like the complete opposite of, a Siddur where you have the thing and it's existed for a millennia and you just hand it down. Everyone has their own Haggadah. And I think there would be no resistance of, oh, well, this is the Haggadah that's going around. We think this is a cool thing. It's, well, let's make the thing that's relevant to our community. If you want to look at that for inspiration and you want to engage with that, my opinion is I don't want any of it. And I don't want any of that in my Haggadah. But it's your right to read the thing if you want to read the thing. I think it strengthens the community to say, read it if that's the thing you want. But what I think is that we will have a richer Haggadah that is built by us, which I think for really any Chag is like a meaningful exercise. But I think particularly Pesach is like the great, educational activity that is disguised as a dinner.
I love that. And it's also a great segue to the next question, which is, how would you discuss this with your community members? And who would be your partners and your stakeholders in this kind of conversation?
I think that we're kind of keeping it in the Hakel conversation, and I think there's a beautiful opportunity to tap into so many different sub communities in Israel, and kind of maybe organizing some way that different feelings can be heard from the different sub communities. So the Ethiopian sub network, the Kafkazi, kind of former Soviet Union, different immigrant groups, people living in the Gaza border area, like kind of really giving a way to cut through the news cycle and cut through the images and get to people and get to fellow community members, that we can share our thoughts and opinions. And so somebody from Chicago or somebody from I don't know, Philadelphia having a real problem with this operation and wanting to push the Goshen, having an opportunity to talk to Israeli counterparts, I think is just a beautiful opportunity and way in which the pairing of these communities and being part of this global network community of communities can actually really help understand from a human to human level.
Great. So how do you affect change in a power dynamic in which you're outnumbered, have less access, and are less established? I think this goes to what you've been saying about sort of the network and the power dynamics there, but can you just more specifically, when you're outnumbered, how does that work in your context?
You're outnumbered in your own community. So I, as a community member, want to push this, and then the rest of the community isn't on board.
Right, something like that, yeah.
I mean, it's like the old joke of the guy on the island with two shoals, right? Like the one I go to, the one I don't go to. I mean, I think it's an issue of if you're very passionate about some aspect of your communal life and the rest of the community is not on board, that is going to be a wedge issue for you. And I think part of it is how people are listening to you, how people accept what you're saying. That's gonna, potentially make you feel like you have maybe an opportunity to want to stay, even though this really important issue is not being listened or followed or approved. And if you're turned away, and if you're not given space, then I think it's clear you're gonna find a different community that's going to be more accepting. And I think that's a real lesson in an opportunity to be listening to fellow community members. Yeah.
Great. So which of the courses of action that have been discussed, which would you say, I'm asking you as presenters, which course of action do you think makes the most sense in this scenario?
I think, like, turn it on its head. I think what Jonathan is saying, and I think what we were also saying, is that change the conversation from accept or don't accept to how do we create our own. And that is a way forward. It's not there, it's not just one or two. There's always a third way. And I think operating that third way of creating your own and connecting different people from varied viewpoints, political viewpoints in this respect, can only benefit people's knowledge of what's really happening on the ground in both senses, right? What would be happening in Israel after an operation, and also what's happening for young Jews who are seeing images that are really difficult to swallow with this vision of what they think Israel should or could be.
I also think that in regards to what Gabe's saying, I agree. And I think that oftentimes when we turn it into yes or no, do or don't conversations, it also is what leads us to practice less empathetic listening and not allow for again, and this, like, I'm advocating it also for the younger generation who is also having trouble hearing other people's opinions. Like, I'm not just talking about those older than me or my peers or those younger than me. Like, we have so much to learn as Jews about listening. And I just think that when it's a yes or no argument, it's much harder for people to find comfortable space to listen within. And so when a third or an alternative is presented, people are much more open to hearing a range of opinions.
I love the idea of addressing the Friday night dinner table, of just like creating that as a more space. I think like a more meaningful, more safe space. That what Ravit was saying before. I think it's like a really interesting idea, and I think it's definitely a thing that I would sit down at Friday night dinners and feel like it's like not a space that people actually want to have a conversation that feels safe and engaging. So I'm definitely pro. If the messaging can be both in formal and informal communities, how can we reclaim the family dinner as a space in which people can like express what they think and feel. I'm pro that.
Great. Thank you.
Also, sorry, I just want to add one more thing to that really
Please.
quickly, which is also what Gabe said before, which is also that you don't necessarily need to validate what the other people say. Like there's also a promotion within, right, empathetic listening, that there needs to be a lot of validation. And I think there can also be empathetic listening practice in which you can also say that you don't agree with what someone else says, and that can also be okay and kosher, and there can be space to move on. But I think the allowance for that is really, really essential for our community.
Thank you. Any other final thoughts from y'all about the scenario or course of action? Okay, so I'm just going to, there were a couple comments that came in. So I'm just going to summarize some of them. One is coming from Manchester, England, which says, in 1967, I was at school. Everyone expected Israel to disappear. In 1991, during Kuwait, I alone guarded the local Jewish school. I recently worked in a bank where the team I worked with was mostly Muslim, shouted Free Palestine during the training. After the training, we had to work together. I was able to educate and befriend them. I followed a recent march of sympathizers of Palestine guarded by the police, shouting river to the sea and waving Palestinian flags. In my family, we have BDS and Justice for Palestine leaders. And now we have 2 local sites to debate Israel and 2 local sites to debate with local Manx in Israel and Brits in Israel. We need to preempt all this by having personal education programs for the wider communities, websites to connect with all people within or outside the communities. That was one comment. And the second one was that I would also like to add that the local leadership, such as the Jewish Representative Council here, is older and not social media savvy. The Muslim members of the local joint organization for multi-faith has been anti-Israel in the press. Social media and outreach needs to be developed well in advance of such situations. So thank you for those who are tuning in and watching us for your comments and participation. I'm going to just sum up quickly this panel that we've just experienced, or at least do my best, because I know you had many, many points and they went in different directions, which is amazing. And it was really a pleasure to facilitate. I just want to say that it seems like in this particular scenario, what we would advise or what we're going to do is to produce our own insert that people can use in their own Haggadahs if they so wish. We're going to increase Friday night as an opportunity for people to have more honest conversations and exercise empathetic listening. And I think we're also going to, in this sort of decentralized network that we're operating in, be able to have the shul that we go to and the shul that we don't. And, you know, just because a certain entity has a certain opinion, we're still going to go forward with our own beliefs. And that's pretty much how the decentralized network works. And in conclusion, I just want to say that what we're putting forward is this idea that global communities have different relationships to Israel. And it's sort of the North American Jewry has its own relationship to Israel, which can be at times be different than those in other places. And I encourage listeners to be advised that, you know, different communities have different relationships, and it's not just the straightforward kind of dynamic that sometimes is presented. So I hope we've been able to open your eyes a little to some of the more global considerations in this scenario. And the conference is going to continue at 1 p.m. Pacific time, so you can tune back into the experience in the last part of the workshop. Do not forget to sign up for the newsletter to receive updates about Z3. And in the coming months, Z3 will share a report from this futures workshop in which they're going to share the significant findings from this exercise. So thank you so much again for joining us, and tune back in and stay engaged. Thank you so much. And a special thank you to our panelists who really shared so much information, to Gabe and Ravit, and to Jonathan, I really appreciate your spending your afternoon with us, or an evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you for facilitating. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.